Hello, Mrs. Ford here again. Today we're going to be talking about pollination. Just a quick reminder, if at any time you need to pause the video to take notes, or if I ask you to go and fill in a vocab word in your vocab glossary at the beginning of this unit, please do so. That's why I do these videos, so that way you can pause them, go back, re-listen to something if you need to. That way you have this information and an explanation of the information even when you're not in class. So I hope you enjoy using this video as a tool to help you further understand the content. And like I said, today we're going to be talking about pollination. There are two types of pollination, which we'll get into in just a moment. But before we get there, I do want to talk a moment about the guy that helped bring us the subject or the study of heredity, and that is going to be Gregor Mendel. So Gregor Mendel was born in 1822. He was an Austrian monk, and he spent a lot of time in the garden in the monastery where he lived. And he primarily experimented with pea plants, and we're going to talk about why here in just a moment. We consider Gregor Mendel to be the father of genetics, and like I said, we call him the father of genetics because he's kind of the first one that figured out how heredity worked, how traits were passed down from parent to offspring. And genetics, you'll notice this is highlighted and underlined here. So I would like you to go ahead and pause the video at this time and add this to your glossary at the beginning of this unit. So you're going to put the word genetics, and you're just going to put down the page number, whatever page in your notebook that this is on. Okay, so again, go ahead and pause now. All right, and so just to pick back up, genetics is the study of how traits are passed from parent to offspring. So Mendel primarily studied the genetics of pea plants because they were very simple, right? But obviously, genetics can be applied to humans. It's much more complicated, but we have genes, and genetics applies to us. And Gregor Mendel was kind of the first one to help make those connections on how we get certain traits from our parents. Okay. So his research. Again, he studied pea plants to research heredity. Heredity, there's another vocab word. Go ahead and pause. Include this in your glossary. Heredity is the passing of genetic traits from parents to offspring. So think about it. In your family, you probably have people that have the same color hair, same colored eyes. Maybe you have the same colored eyes as your mom or your dad. We get those traits from our parents, and we get those traits through heredity. So the heredity, again, is us getting that genetic information from our parents. Now, why didn't he just study people, right? Like, why not? Well, because people and genetics of humans is very complicated, and it can be very, very tricky. And at this time, there wasn't a whole lot of science to back it up. So he chose pea plants because they were very, very simple. They had simple traits, very few variations, which meaning there wasn't a whole lot of variety. The plants were either short or tall. The flowers that the plants produced were either purple or white. And there wasn't like a huge variety. Like if you think of eye color, you can have, in humans, you can have blue eyes, green eyes, brown eyes, hazel eyes. It's a lot of variety. And that variety can make genetics pretty complicated pretty quickly. So he wanted to stick with a plant that had very few variations and was simple to study. This way, he could look at one characteristic at a time. And again, they grow very, very quickly, so he was able to do lots of different studies within a relatively short period of time. Okay, so pea plants are able to do two types of pollination. They can self-pollinate and cross-pollinate. We need to figure out what those words mean. So again, you see that these two words are highlighted, so go ahead and add these to your glossary. Okay, so I first want to talk about cross-pollination. So cross-pollination is when pollen from one plant fertilizes the ovule or the eggs of a flower on a different plant. So pollen, you can think of pollen as like the like plant sperm, if you will. So it is the male component, the male genetic component in plants. Okay, and then the ovule or the eggs are the female part of plants. So basically what cross-pollination is we have pollen from a dad plant or a daddy plant and eggs from a mommy plant. And then those two connect and are able to create a baby plant that has genetic information from both mom and dad. So in cross-pollination, it involves two different plants. Again, a male plant and a female plant will connect the pollen and the eggs together to create a new genetically unique plant that has half of the father's DNA and half of the mother's DNA. Pea plants can also self-pollinate. Self-pollination happens when you have a plant that has both male and female reproductive organs. So they have both the pollen and the eggs, or the pollen and the ovules, and it can fertilize itself. Okay, so let's think about this. If you have a plant that has the male and the female parts in order to make a plant or an offspring, what is that offspring going to look like? Okay, so because the DNA in the self-pollinating plant is coming from the same plant, the offspring is going to be a clone or an exact copy of what the original parent plant was, theoretically. Okay, because we're not introducing anybody else's DNA here. We are only talking about one plant. Okay, so what does all that mean? Mendel was able to compare the offspring of the true breeding plants. Now, true breeding plants, this is what we call our self-pollinating plants, because we know what to expect. We know that if a plant self-pollinates, that they are going to have genetic copies of themselves. So we know what to expect in the offspring. Whereas in the cross-pollinating plants, we're not quite sure. There could be a variety of outcomes for the offspring. Okay, so he was able to compare the offspring of the self-pollinating or true breeding plants with the offspring of the cross-pollinated plants. Okay, and you guys will have access to this video and this PowerPoint through Canvas. So if you feel like you would like to go through and watch this video on Gregor Mendel, feel free.